walking out of the
didn't know.
elevator.
Oh, you didn't know?
I didn't know who it was. Like I was like, I thought I recognized her from the pictures, but then like it's like, oh, this might just be like a regular person in Jenna's building.
Regular person in Jenna's building. This is Leader-Chivee, everybody, and if you don't pronounce her last name that way, well, that's on you, because that's not what I do. You're a political strategist, would it be safe to say, for the most part?
Well, sort of. I mean, I really think of myself as more of a diversity and women's equality activist, I guess is how I would put it. And I do work in politics, but you know, no one pays me to strategize for them, so
right.
It's hard to call me the strategist. Although I have strategy in there.
I would imagine that whether people pay you to be a strategist or not, it has been a very eventful couple of months for you.
Yes, it has. You know, I mean, look, I did have some sense. I mean, I'm not super surprised by where we are, and I did have some sense that this was going to be a really incredibly complicated election, and I did have a sense that, you know, if Hillary ran, which I think we all kind of knew she would, and if any other women ran, which one did, that we would be faced with a level of intensity around gender politics that we have never seen before. And that turned out, of course, to be true. And then that's amplified, of course, by a candidate on the other side, and who, you know, has really made a fine art out of alienating and offending pretty much everyone in America, but has been willing to take some of the gendered attacks to a really extraordinary level. But I'm not super surprised by it. I mean, I did have the sense that it's really still where we are as a country in a lot of ways.
What is gender politics?
What is gender politics? Well, I mean, it means a lot of things. Look, I think there is a reality of what women in visible roles of leadership face, no matter what that visible leadership is, right? We do still absolutely, positively have double standards. And those double standards are perpetrated by both men and women. I mean, women have sort of an equal amount of bias in many ways around what a leader looks like or what a leader is supposed to be. And we, all of us, carry around all kinds of expectations about what we think women leaders are supposed to be, you know, which is this sort of impossible balance between warm and inclusive and caring, but tough and strong and relentless, and we have very complicated feelings about the idea of ambition when it comes to women. So all of these things are very complicated, and that gets amplified in politics because it's on television every day, and because you've got, you know, the whole world commenting on it. But it's really not that different than what women in business face, for instance, when they step into very high levels of leadership. It's just not as visible to the country when they do.
If Hillary was running against anybody else, would we be talking more about gender politics? Or were you talking about more the fact that she's a woman, that she's the first woman, that what a huge, monumental step forward this is in our country, in our history, that we're going to potentially put a woman in office? I just feel like we're not even talking about that because
we're still not. I mean, we're still not, because look, I mean, the one thing so to answer your first question, yes, I do think we would be talking about this no matter who is running, but I think we're seeing it in a very stark relief in this particular campaign because of the just unbelievable contrast between somebody who, you know, has clearly some pretty complicated history with women, who is very, you know, old school kind of Mad Men type of macho man, right, and all the stuff that goes along with that, and then, you know, this woman who is running, who, you know, of course everyone acknowledges is qualified and exceptional, but, you know, her opposition has done an exceptionally good job of using her gender against her, right? Using the complicated emotions we all have about female ambition against her, right? Painting her as somebody who is willing to do anything to get ahead, right? That she's cold and calculating, that she's a liar, all of these things, which have been really successful attacks against her. And they've been successful in part because of some things she's done that haven't helped her. You know, certainly the email stuff was, you know, didn't help her. But I think, you know, that stuff works because of all of the complicated feelings we carry around about gender.
Well, I mean, I think I can't decide what to do.
Sort of
the minute you take it off, it's a really.
I know. I'm going to keep them on.
All right, I'll put it back on. Just be very diva about it. When you say you're not that surprised where we are, first of all, you have to be surprised that he was able to make it through the primaries. Like, I don't know if I felt like he was the guy that was going to be the last man standing.
I mean, that was one thing I definitely got wrong. I'm on record as having said he never would get this far. But I mean, look, one of the reasons for it, and, you know, there's been a lot of postmortem that happens after this, and especially among Republicans, because, you know, the fact is that this the biggest disaster of this election really is for the Republican Party, and particularly for moderate, sort of middle of the road, rank and file Republicans for whom this candidate does not represent their values on economics, on immigration, on women, on almost anything, right? So it's a total anomaly in that sense. But, the biggest issue for the Republican Party is going to be this deep question of how do they reconcile the extremes in their midst. And, that is a really complicated equation. And I did not think he would get this far, but it is also the effect of a primary process, right? Because the primary process in this country, which is a closed primary in most states, enables kind of the far left and the far right to have an outsized voice, which is also part of why you saw, Bernie do so well, and he, for all kinds of really interesting reasons. But the primary process itself creates this kind of thing, and frankly, we had some really not very effective candidates on the Republican side. You got to ask, where was their opposition research during the primaries? How did none of them turn any of this stuff up? They could have used it very effectively against him early on. Jeff Bush raised $100 million. Where do you put that money, right? It could have been used more effectively. I don't believe that this is representative of who we are as a country.
But this is our system, and it's the only system we have.
That's true.
It's not going anywhere as much as we would. We all bitched and moaned about the system throughout every primary and caucus. What do you do?
Well, there's a lot that we can do about it. So first of all, the state parties are kind of I'm gonna go on record. The state parties are a mess.
Nice.
In the sense that they are, extremely wedded to, a power structure in the states, which, which is pretty broken. And by the way, New York State is a great example of this. Do you know that so we have an election coming up next November, which of course we're not thinking about yet, but we do. We have a mayoral and municipal election next fall. The voter registration deadline is last Friday.
Yes.
So nobody knows that. So
I didn't know that.
If you didn't register,
then you can't
you're
vote.
done. You're out.
Right.
You're not,
And you know how I knew that? Because someone said it on Facebook.
Right. And there was a lot. So there's good reason for state. We're not going to get into all of that. However, here's the stuff that we can do something about. So first of all, when Bernie calls for a political revolution, he's not kidding. We actually really do need a dramatic increase in civic participation of women and minorities, especially. It is probably the most important investment that we can be making because we do not have a representative democracy. We have a democracy that is representative of a very small slice of the American population, which is, white, wealthy white men are overrepresented in our government. That's unacceptable. But that's also our own fault. We have to step forward and participate. And many women and minorities in this country see the process as so broken. We're willing to show up and vote in big elections because we feel like we can affect the outcome. We don't do anything else. Women have turned every election in this country since 1980. We elect the President of the United States. We alone, because we are more likely to be registered and more likely to show up at the polls than any other group. But what happens the day after the election? We basically opt out of the process. We don't write to our members of Congress. We don't show up at town hall meetings. We're not running. We're not engaging on all the other measures. So until we have many more Americans, sort of average Americans, stepping forward to participate and to say, look, it's a democracy, I own it too, we're going to continue to suffer. The state parties are able to kind of do what they do because they don't get pressure from the public. They don't have lots of average citizens stepping up and saying, I want to go run, the New York State Democrats, or I'm going to go, get involved in civic council or in my community board.
And why is that? Is it that women don't know, or is it the women don't feel like?
So it's a couple of things. I do think we've done a pretty good job of convincing people that our process is so broken you can't fix it. Right? That has been basically a trope in this election, and for the last few elections, government is broken, Washington is broken, vote the bums out. Well, that's part of the solution. But part of what makes it work is us participating and stepping forward and insisting that our representatives do what we hired them to do, right? So part of it is that we think we can't fix it, and that's not true. Of course we can. But also part of it is it's really opaque, and most of us don't know how, right? Like I'm a college-educated, reasonably, well-informed person, and I had to go do a lot of homework to figure it out, and that's why I spend a lot of my time teaching other people, because I owe you the beat. Don't put us down on air. That would really be unfortunate.
The worst.
That would not be good.
Can you reset just for people?
Yes.
Sure.
Hi, I'm talking to Leader-Chivee. So good. She's a political strategist, non-political strategist, author, activist, proponent of women's rights. we need to get more involved with lower factions of government rather than just on election day. I'm going to keep going. But this is who we're talking to. I'm blissfully entertained and informed right now. So
I'm blissfully sunning myself.
Yes, well, we want you to be as comfortable as possible, so you can just, all you have to worry on is just talk. That's all you got to do. Just open your mouth and make things come out.
So yeah, look, one of the reasons that I wrote my book, Crossing the Finish Line, was that I really feel like we do need to start looking. I think most Americans look at what happened in this election with some combination of horror and disgust, right? How did we get here? How did we wind up in a place where we have, white supremacist groups, hate groups that are calling the shots, and then whole swaths of the country who feel that the candidate on the other side is hateful, is a criminal, pick any number of really sort of, all right, I'll say it, deplorables on both sides, and it gets, you see that people are really frustrated. So the question is really, like, are we okay with having these same conflicts over and over again? Are we okay with having a nation where people are suspicious of one another, where they feel that the government is not representative of them, where, we are at odds with one another over everything? I'm not. And I think most Americans don't see us that way, that's not who we are. Right? We are fundamentally a nation that embraces difference. It's what our nation was built on and founded on. And there has always been this sort of backlash against that. But it is absolutely who we are, and it is what has made us strong. So I've become really interested in, like, how do we fix this? Like, what do we need to do to make sure that we permanently move out of these conflicts, that we don't continue to recycle them? And I think there's a lot of dimensions to that.
What's the answer?
So there's a couple things. First of all, I do think that we have to start more seriously dealing with the realities of being as diverse of a country as we are. Okay? We in this country have always believed, the melting pot is like the great American idea, right? We throw everyone together and everything works and people get along. It's mythology. It's not true. It actually takes work. And we don't want a melting pot, because the melting pot implies that everyone's supposed to just give up who they are to become part of this big sort of anonymous American identity. Well, most people reject that idea now. Whether or not there is something that is essentially American, right? The belief in equality, in justice, in democracy, those things are American. But everything else about who we are is a combination of lots of different spices and sauces, right? And we don't want to eliminate those. But we do have to deal with learning how to understand each other. And I think there's a bunch of things that are troubling me that I think we need to deal with. One is you got to look at what we're doing in our education system. Since Brown versus Board of Education, which we all, I think, agree was one of the great milestones of American progress, right? The fundamental right for kids to have equal access to education regardless of race. When you look at the charts of how schools have integrated, since Brown, it's becoming a bell curve. And it peaked in about 1998. And in 1998, we hit sort of the height of school integration, and now we have declined. And kids today are more likely to go to a homogenous school where there's very little diversity than they were 20 years ago. That's unacceptable. How are we going to prepare the next generation of kids to live in a nation that will be minority majority if they only ever go to school with people who are like them? Right? You actually have to learn how to connect with people. So that's one thing. And you see stuff happening all over around this. So here in New York City, there's a huge fight happening on the Upper West Side.
West Side of removing our kids I know.
Yeah, and so I'll explain what it is. And I'm going to the hearing this Saturday because I heard about it, and I have a friend who's on the board, and I really want to understand this better.
Please explain it to me, because I'm only hearing it from the parent standpoint. But the only thing I hear from the other side is diversity.
Yeah. So years ago, the school districts on the Upper West Side were drawn in a pretty specific way. And one of the ways that happened is that the housing projects on Amsterdam Avenue, which are largely minority, were actually carved out as its own school zone. And the Lincoln Towers and the other parts of the more affluent, mostly white parts of the Upper West Side were zoned separately. And the result is, and again, I'm not an expert on this, I'm learning, but the result is that we have some deeply, deeply segregated schools right in the middle of the Upper West Side, where you've got, primarily African American schools, just down the street from primarily white schools. I think most of us would agree, that runs contrary to the basic premise of equality in our education system. And so what they're trying to do is to rezone so that there is greater racial integration. Now, one thing that I think gets lost, and by the way, there's fights like this happening all over the country, and what happens is that the families, especially the white families, who get caught in this get very, very upset at the implication that they are somehow racist because they don't want their kids moving to a different school, and that's fair. On the other hand, we have to be willing to make some hard choices because all children, and this goes back to the affirmative action fights you heard at the Supreme Court last year in the Texas case, where Justice Scalia asked the question, what difference does it make if there's black kids or black students in a physics class, and the courtroom gasped. Well, the issue with school integration, it's not just that it gives a better educational experience to the black kids, and it is largely minority kids that have suffered in our current segregation, which does continue. It's that the white kids are also at an intellectual and academic disadvantage in a homogenous school. Everyone is disadvantaged in a homogenous school environment because all the evidence shows that when you go to school with kids who are different from you, when you go to work with people who are different from you, when you have to collaborate or innovate with people who are different from you, it raises everyone's game. It makes everyone smarter. And so there's a lot of evidence that the academic achievement of all children are improved by diverse schools. But it gets very complicated, as you've heard.
What are the parents' arguments that it's not racist?
It wouldn't be fair of me to get into it all right now because I feel like I need to understand it more deeply.
Sure.
But I mean, lots of issues come up: issues of safety, issues of quality, all the things that are very fair. And certainly, when it's your own kid, you want the best for them. But at some point, I think this EB feels that they are making an important decision for the future of the city.
But what I will say is when you say that these municipalities aren't doing enough and education is where we start,
Right.
I mean, they're
It's
doing
ground zero.
Sure, but at least they're starting. They're starting to rezone. They're starting, and it's hard for them to do when every step of the way they're meeting with .org groups and screaming parents and what's
my friend on the
you don't
board,
want them to say, well, I'm going to wash my hands. Why even bother changing when we're going to be met with such
and look, you
hostility?
see this all over the country. I wrote a lot, and so my bias is towards making these hard decisions to ensure our schools are diverse and that all kids have the same access to a great education. That's my bias. Now, I recognize the complexities of each individual situation, but I really don't see a downside. And I wrote a lot about this in the book because I wrote a lot about the school districts of Normandy outside of St. Louis, which is one of another great examples. There was a big ProPublica piece on this. Look, St. Louis, the St. Louis School District took until 1988 to begin to comply with Brown versus Board of Education. 1988. Okay, so St. Louis spent 30 years fighting school integration. What does that mean for those kids? White and black, and that's what I think gets lost in this. So anyway, I do talk about why I think school integration is so critical. I talk a lot about why I think families of all races need to be talking more about race. I think white families need to do this more. So I have 2 African American kids, and one of the things that I learned in writing the book is I had to face the fact that I actually, even as liberal and socially conscious and diversity aware I am, my immediate reaction when my kids want to talk about race is I want to change the subject. That's my visceral gut reaction. And one of the things I learned in the research for the book is that there's all kinds of evidence that, we like to think we're colorblind, right? And that we're not talking about it because we're all the same. Right? The problem is that all the psychology shows that the conclusion that children draw when in the absence of information is not that everyone's the same, it's that there's something bad. And so minority Americans talk about race with their kids far more than white Americans do. I think that's a problem. I think we have to talk about it even when we're uncomfortable. We need to help our kids understand it. And you know what? We're not all the same. We are all human. But our minority brothers and sisters have a very different experience in this country than we do, or than I do. And I think we have an obligation, just as you would, LGBT issues is another example of that, right? We've made unbelievable strides as a country. I mean, just about in our lifetimes, right? Think about the transformation that we could go from, the reality of what it was like in our childhood to marriage equality in such a short period of time. We are capable of this when we make it personal, right? And the progress of the LGBT progress in this country happened because more gays and lesbians were willing to come out to their families, right? And it became about love. And I think we really have to start doing some of the same work around race and around gender, which is finding those ways to transcend the boundaries through love and mutual respect and a deeper level of understanding.
I think that this is all wonderful to talk about, and it's great, and we should, and we know the direction we need to move in, but I think when someone stops and says, okay, what can I do?
Yeah.
Me, myself, today, what can I do? I think that's where people just don't know, and it's so overwhelming that they're lost and they move on.
Well, look, a couple things. I do think that we can vote with our feet, and we can choose to live in communities and in neighborhoods that are diverse, and I think we largely, it's human nature. We all want to live and work with people we have things in common with, and that's fair. But we do also, I think, have choices that we make all the time about the churches we go to, about the community groups we participate in, about the neighborhoods we live in, about the schools we send our kids to, around the conversations that we have, around who we invite to holiday dinners. We do have to make the effort. And I'll say on the political front, we also have some choices about what kinds of policies we support. I happen to think that like criminal justice reform and immigration reform are two of the most important issues of our time because of all of this background of understanding. And we're still incarcerating a huge percentage of our minority citizens, which means we're draining our future talent pool and the economy of their participation in our nation. So there are lots of small and large ways in which we can make a difference. I mean, the book is really all about that.
Yeah. So what sparked that? I mean, where did that come from?
Well, I have been thinking about this stuff for a while, and I work with a lot of big companies on these issues, and I've been working on politics on these issues, and I just felt like when I looked around, there really wasn't. We've never had a book. I mean, really, other than Lean In, right? We've never had a book that really pushed us to have a kind of big picture conversation around how can we do better in diversity, and I wanted to try to do that and see if we could focus on what's good and what's possible and what the solutions are, and that's what drove me. And it may not be the book may not succeed, but I feel proud of what I did. I felt like it was an important thing to write.
Leader-Chivee is the author of Crossing the Thinnest Line. What's been the reaction so far? Have you heard from a number of different
and I've been doing more media around it. I'm really pleased. I have to say, I was very nervous about what my African American friends would think, especially, and my Hispanic American friends, because I am a white woman writing about diversity, and I don't have the fullness of experience that they do. So the support from those folks actually means the most to me, and I'm really grateful for it. And I think most of the friends that have been honest with me have said they feel that I do justice to the topic in a way that speaks to them, and that they wish sort of more white people would talk about.
Did you have to keep that in your head as you were writing it?
Absolutely. I mean, I opened the book with my personal story and about my life, and I felt I needed to do that because I'm not Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't have that life experience. I have my own life experience of bias and of exclusion that was important, but I don't know what it's like to worry about driving my car and getting pulled over. So I did feel that I needed to explain where I was coming from and to be really honest about it and honest about my own biases and warts and all, because we all have them, and we have to be able to be honest about them if we want to move forward, and so that's what I tried to do.
How's the black vote going to affect the election?
It's a huge part of the election. Look, so I told you before, right, that the most active voters in America are women, but the most active voters in America are actually black women. African American women are more likely to be registered to vote and more likely to turn up at the polls than any other demographic group in the country. They are powerful and they take their civic responsibility very seriously. So, just saying, whoever's running, you might not want to make them mad.
Right.
You might not want to offend them. You might want to try to understand them. They are incredibly important. And I wish more political leaders understood that.
I actually have a question.
Please.
From Tony.
Yeah.
How is the voter turnout for the primaries and the school elections in New York? He said in Michigan it's low. The voters don't realize how important those votes are.
Yeah, I mean, municipal and local elections have horrendous voter turnout. I mean,
unless they're moving your kids' school.
Right. So that kind of stuff. So school boards have started. Yeah. So you're right. So school board is one area of civic participation where Americans seem to get really involved. There's about 90,000 school board seats across the country, And we do see more women than before running for school board, and I think it is a good stepping stone for a lot of people to greater civic and political action. Because it's personal, people take it really seriously. It's their kid, right? But there's other stuff that, like, I'd like to see people, participate in beyond school board. But when you ask the question about the elections, municipal election voter turnout is terrible. And, in this city, it's an off year. So I've been told that it's about, so to win, so we've got 8 million residents in New York City, right? But the votes in that municipal election, it's only about 600,000, right? 600,000 people out of 8 million, right? It's very, very low. That's another example. But, we don't do any favors because, we don't always, we make it hard for people to vote. We don't always make it as easy as we could. But that said, like, that kind of stuff matters more than I think we think it does.
And I don't think people realize those numbers, and I think...
I know, they're terrible. I didn't realize it. Someone just told me. I was shocked.
Yeah.
8 million people, 600,000 turn out to vote.
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Anything else from Tony?
Thanks,
Tony did have a comment about he said that at Target they sell a cabana
For the sun?
For the sun that we should actually be
Okay.
Good to know.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah. So I don't have any other comments. People are just listening.
They what?
They're just listening.
Oh, gotcha. How long have you lived in the city?
25 years.
Are you from here?
I grew up in D.C. So, I kind of grew up in a political world.
Yeah, you did.
In D.C., look, I wrote a lot about it in the book. D.C. is a really unique and special place. When I was growing up, it was about 90% African American. It still is majority African American. It's a very, very diverse city. People from all over the world. And it's a very socially conscious city where people take their civic participation, very seriously. And so I was raised in an environment where people talked about race and talked about social justice a lot. And my parents did, certainly. But, I grew up in even though my kind of immediate neighborhood was pretty white, the city was so diverse and our schools were diverse. So, I always had about 30 to 40% of my class that was African American or other backgrounds. It made a huge impression on me. And then in high school, I went to...
Wait, how?
Well, because I had, first of all, so my best friend in early elementary school was black adopted into a white Jewish family. And so, P.S., I'm Jewish, I'm white, and I now have 2 black adopted children.
Right.
Kind of amazing. So race was such a part of the kind of conversation from such a young age, and we did talk about it, and I had friends who talked about it and who wanted me to understand that their experience in the world was different from mine. And I went to schools where they worked on helping us understand that, and I feel enormously grateful. I also, though, experienced some of my own, discrimination, and I talk about it in the book. In the 7th grade, I was excluded from a birthday party because it was at a very exclusive country club that excluded Jews. And I was the only Jew in the class, and I didn't get invited. I'm the only one who wasn't invited. And, that experience of powerlessness shaped me forever. I will never forget that feeling of humiliation and of frustration and anger. And it was just enough that while I could never fully relate to what it is to be a visible minority, like I get like this much of it in a really personal way.
Yep.
That makes me want to change it. That makes me want to make it better for people. That makes me want to help make a more inclusive and thoughtful nation. Because it sucks. It sucks to be treated that way. And no one deserves that. And the thing that bothers me is that I feel like a lot of Americans in this particular climate, we had a debate where, we had Mike Pence and Tim Kaine debating about whether or not there's implicit bias in our policing. At the end of the day, I'm sorry that Mike Pence doesn't believe it. It really doesn't matter whether he believes it or not. If we have any of our citizens who feel that they cannot fully participate in the American dream, then that's it.
Right.
Like, that should be enough for us to want to make it better.
Right.
No American should feel that they are second-class citizens. I mean, that's unacceptably in contrast with our values as a nation.
How soon before we can realistically see change in this country? And does it change when someone new takes office?
Well, look, I actually am really optimistic. I actually really am. And, I talked about the LGBT issues. I mean, nowhere else in American society do you see a better example of what we're capable of, right? That when we really focus on equality and on our values, we make a extraordinary strides in very short times. And you look at the attitudes of millennials around gay and lesbian issues, around diversity, around women, their attitudes are completely different, right, than my dad's. And my dad's pretty progressive, but, than my dad's, or, anyone sort of in the 60-plus generation. Radical, massive change in the way those people see the world. And so that's a good thing. And I'm really optimistic about that. All I'm saying is that you don't sustain those gains without work. Right? And if we go back to, if we double down on the divisiveness of this election, if we continue to empower white supremacists on Twitter, and continue to invest in really divisive rhetoric about immigrants, we may not sustain those gains. And there's still 26 states where it's still legal to fire someone for being gay, where there are no protections, where we see the religious liberty bills popping up in states around the country, from Indiana to North Carolina, so we got work to do. But the amazing thing is the response, right? You see what happens when North Carolina passes a bill like that, right? You've got trillions of dollars that leaves the state. And we've got big businesses today that are willing to use their money.
But did it change?
Well, I mean, look, until he's voted out and the state legislature is willing to take it on again, unfortunately, it doesn't change. But I think it's temporary. And I think we're going to see Supreme Court challenges to this. I think we're going to see serious challenges to the rules around equality, around workplace equality. I think we're going to see those things change. But at the end of the day, we have to change the laws. But we got to get to hearts and minds, right? And that has been the most significant part of our progress, is that we do have now 92 million Gen Ys in this country, whose hearts and minds see the world differently.
Yeah.
And that's powerful. They're the biggest generation in history.
How old are your kids?
7 and 13 months.
Months?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, good for you.
Yeah,
congratulations.
A little mini mine.
Yeah, they're like little
What's the
green
adoption
cards.
process like?
Oh my god, that's like a whole other show. A whole other show.
That's it.
Well, so things have changed a lot since my older daughter was adopted. So in the last 7 years, because of gay marriage. So when both my kids are from Florida, and just to give you an idea, when my daughter Stella, who's now 7, was born, before her adoption, there was a whole set of forms that we had to fill out in the state of Florida, which were basically just there to prove we weren't gay. Because had we been gay, we would not have been able to adopt in Florida then. It's no longer the case. But yeah, literally, it was like a 10-page form, and then there was one little box. Are you gay?
Really?
Basically, and if you, I think it was, are you a homosexual? And then if you check that, you're done. You're out.
Wow.
So that's changed, thank God. But it also means it's harder because there are so many people who want to adopt babies now, and the process is really complicated, and there are a lot of poor women around the country who unfortunately kind of know that the adoption route is one way to, kind of work some people over, and so we had more than our fair share of really unfortunate situations of people who took advantage of us. But, the vast majority of the women who make these choices, they really want a great family. And the thing that's so amazing, do you know that several times, and I thought this was incredible, that we worked through private adoption, and, where we had a lawyer and we worked directly with these birth moms. We had 2 birth moms choose gay couples over us.
Really?
And I thought,
Why?
I'm bummed, but that's progress.
Yeah, really. Way to be happy. Still getting screwed. Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
And they're choosing, they get a whole pile of family profiles,
Yeah.
and they decide who they want. We had a couple of them say, no, I want 2 kids.
That's so
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a process. But you know what? When it's meant to be, it's meant to be. They were meant to be my kids, and it was a beautiful.
So 7 months and 13 months.
Yeah.
I would imagine at some point you have this conversation with them, and it's no different, just using different words in the conversation that Steph and I are going to have with our kids. It's
Right.
a little bit different. You came into a little bit different family, but this is how we fit into society, and this is how great
Yeah.
laws have helped us, and this is
I
what
mean, kids are pretty adopted kids, I would say, probably have it better now than ever before, because no one's lying about it, no one's hiding it, there's no big secret. My older daughter was in the room when my younger daughter was born, and when we signed the papers, saw that whole process unfold, and it was really cool because it was the same lawyers, and so she got to see her own story through her sister, which was really magical. And so
Are
she'll
they
be able to tell
biological
her.
sisters?
They're not
Oh, they're
biological
not.
sisters,
Okay.
but very similar process. They look a lot alike. but they're not biological sisters. So, you know, it's just like it's got to be just a part of life. Like, you don't have one big talk. It's not like, you know, she turns 12 and we're like, guess what? The reason that you don't look like me is, you know, it's pretty obvious. She came home from school when she was 2 and said, "Mama, I'm brown." I said, yes, because she just learned her colors, so she figured out that she was brown and I was not brown. And so we've talked about that. She knows who her birth mother is and, you know, all that stuff. So
wait, I'm confused. You also have a 7-year-old.
7-year-old, 13 months.
Oh.
7, not 7, and you were hearing 7. You were saying like 7 and 13 months.
I thought you have a 7-month-old.
Oh
and
no, there's
13-month-old. That's why I was like,
no,
two
there's
little.
2.
And I'm like, that older one is so far ahead. She came
At
home. I think 13 months. Where are you sending her?
At 13 months, she's 2.
Sorry.
Then I did the
Stella
math
is
in my
7.
head.
Serena is 13 months.
Gotcha. Okay, that would be interesting. But yeah,
they're very cute.
You're right. It's going to be a process.
Right. I mean, like, you're never gonna have to have one big talk with your kids. Like, guess what? You
No,
have
for
2 moms.
Father's Day, the teacher called us and asked. They were all making cards for the fathers, and what we suggested. I was like, what do you usually? What's protocol? What do you guys do anyway? So they said it's up to you. I'm like, okay, so we'll make it for our we'll make it for our dad. So they made grandfather's
cute.
cards, or she made grandfather's cards, which
I
was
love that.
fine. Yeah, but then that kid was like working overtime, double time on Mother's Day.
I bet.
Everyone else had one card. I was like, make 2 cards, 2. That one's bigger. Make that one bigger.
You can't share a card.
Can't share a card. Nope.
Can you share anything?
What do you mean?
You and Steph, do you guys share?
Steph and I share absolutely everything except for shoes. And we would share
clothes, I
shoes.
thought.
No, we share clothes.
Oh, you
She just doesn't want me to share her
Oh,
clothes.
but you share them anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
She leaves for work before I do. I get to wear whatever I want.
Okay.
As long as I put it back in the closet, everything's good.
It seems like there's real advantages to that.
There's
Like, expands your
huge
wardrobe.
advantage. Doubles it.
Yeah.
Easily doubles it. Plus, if she has a different style, they can try new
I get
things
it.
on. I was never a scarf person. Now I've got a drawer full of scarves. It's like win-win automatically.
Yeah, I can see that.
The problem we run into are like things that are sorry to be stereotypical, general guy things. You know, like neither of us feel like building is not in our DNA, so we don't want to fix the washing machine if it breaks. It's just we're not good at it. It's not that.
I'm not good at it either.
Well, generally, it was always my dad in the house that always fixed stuff, so we always had to. The
Yeah,
super
I've
has
been
to
Might
making
explain the
my-
divorces.
Yeah, well, this is another one. So, like, we got to get our girls, you know, building and fixing stuff too, right? Because, like, that's important.
Absolutely.
I just saw so I'm really good. I love someone called Rashma Sujani, who founded Girls Who Code, which is one of the you know, all these sort of things out there to try to get more diversity into tech, which is so important, and one of the things I write about in the book. But Rashma kind of rocked my world last weekend with a video. We were at an event together in San Francisco. We were both speaking at a women's leadership event. She put up this video which basically shows all of the sort of subtle biases, you know, when our daughters are trying to hurry into building stuff. And I really got very emotional because I totally saw that I've been doing this to my daughter. My daughter's like totally into building stuff and inventing, doesn't give a can I say shit?
Sure.
Doesn't give a shit about princesses, which makes me so happy. I'm jealous that she doesn't care about princesses. We've expunged the princess.
But did she ever?
Yeah, she had a frozen phase.
Okay, we're in the frozen phase, so it's good to know that
Frozen be
everything.
gone. Anyway, so thank God she's out of it. But I realized, you know, she loves math and she loves puzzles, and I was like, oh my God, like I never liked math. Am I like gonna ruin her? Maybe she's gonna wind up being like a programmer. I need to like get this right. So like we immediately went to the toy store, and you know what? She zeroed in on an inventor's kit, and I realized in the store I was like, I almost would have talked her out of that. And then I was like, you know what? I'm buying her the inventor's kit. We're gonna go invent stuff and make a big mess, which I have a problem with mess, but
Me too.
I got myself through it.
Yeah, I can't. So you should come.
No, I know.
Messy with my kid.
It made me stressed out, but I was like, all right, I'm doing this for the good of future generations. I'm gonna let her make a mess with her inventor's kit.
When did
I
you
felt
start
better.
to see who she could possibly become? At what age?
2?
Really?
Yeah, I would say by 2. Yeah, she was really into puzzles. And I only zero in on the puzzles because Melinda Gates said that she was really into puzzles, and she thinks that's why she liked computer science.
Okay.
So I'm like, all right, I worked for Melinda Gates.
Yeah. Wait, what kind of puzzles? Just so I can go get
Jigsaw.
them. Jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's really into jigsaw puzzles. Anything that's like puzzle, math, put it together, figure it out. Legos. She's really into Legos. She's so happy about that. But you know, I wasn't into any of that. My mother was the ultimate feminist. My mother worked for Bella Abzug the year I was born. okay? My mother was hardcore feminist.
Yeah.
She believed, as did all the women of her generation, that we were conditioned to like Barbie. And then we were conditioned to like the girl stuff. And so she went out and bought me trucks. I couldn't give a damn about the trucks. I wanted Barbie.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was me.
Right.
That's just not my kid, which I'm so pleased.
But now you got another one, so
I know,
who
so
knows?
we'll see where she lands.
Yes.
She's too little. Right now she's just into blueberries and trying to stand up by herself.
Sweet.
That's it.
Mine are knee deep into Frozen. The 20-month-old and the 3-year-old.
The worst.
Knee deep. Like all in.
I love you, Adina Menzel, but honestly,
Too much.
enough.
Or just come up with another movie, something different.
Oh, there will be. There'll be another one.
But that one is all day, every day.
Brutal.
And technology kills me. They're so into it, but I don't know whether to fight it or not fight it. I'm
Yeah.
stressed out about that.
Right, we're all super stressed out about
I
it.
have it in the face passes. I
What's
can
that?
just let them get immersed in it, and then eventually the phase will pass.
I don't know.
Not
Yeah,
with
no-
technology, though. Not with the
No,
iPad.
it's like it's an
It's an
actual addiction. Like
I've
I
seen
can't
it.
even get in touch
I've
with
gone
it.
through it.
That
It's
was
terrible.
scary.
Gumball was attached to it,
Really?
and now she doesn't like it. And jigsaw puzzles.
But they gotta learn they gotta learn computers, and they gotta learn that
Right, so
stuff,
you pull it away from them
yeah.
and they're at a disadvantage when they get to school. I believe
Yeah.
that as well. So I don't know.
Basically, we're all just failing as parents.
We all suck, is what's happening here.
Included. I'm a failure. Just trying to keep myself one step above total failure.
What she said is basically it. Yeah.
In terms of the labels,
Yeah.
like you're using the term African American and white supremacists. So when you is African American preferred over black, and how do you sort of?
I think they're sort of somewhat interchangeable now, I guess, and I think, it's about your own level of comfort, and I think I've not been told by any of my African American friends that they have issues with either of those. Sometimes people get it wrong. Look, you know what I think? I think that white Americans, look, we got to be sensitive and thoughtful about how we refer to our fellow citizens, but be honest if you're uncomfortable and you don't know, and ask somebody, right? Just say, ask a friend, ask a colleague. I feel uncomfortable every time I say this. Should I be thinking about this differently? Is there something else I should be saying? How do you feel about it if I use these words? And not that one person is the authority, but this is really an issue that white Americans, this is the backlash of this election, right? And I'm going to go back to the white supremacists in a second. Why do people gravitate towards Donald Trump and his tell it like it is express, right? It's because there is a dimension in America. The political correctness thing is not totally wrong, in the sense that there are a lot of people who feel aggrieved that they have to try not to offend others, right? And they find that uncomfortable. I think it's important to work